Well, according to the online encyclopedia that I'm looking at, the word bozo, which is what our young intern, Andrew, had called me last week, is defined as a stupid, rude, or insignificant person, especially a man. Now, he said that because I didn't shave, but I will tell you that I did spend a lot of time today with the razor, shaving off the whiskers, so that way our intern does not call me another bozo. Anyhow, greetings. I'm Jeff Williams, your host of North Star Oasis. I'm so glad you could make it today. Thank you very much for joining us. And as is a tradition on this program, just want to remind you, we only have 278 shopping days left until Christmas, so we're counting them down. Before we really begin today's show, I do want to start off with a little bit of a tribute in memoriam. When you look at today's Star Tribune headlines, and I'm going to put it on camera one over here. Yes, here's today's Star Tribune. Alzheimer's drug gives hope. Well, that's not what I wanted to talk about. Right on the front page is a tribute to Betty Lassard. When it comes to pie, Betty was off the charts. And if you've ever been to northern Minnesota, just north of Duluth, on Highway 61, you get to Betty's Pies. Well, this was her place. Betty Lassard had passed away recently, written about in today's Star Tribune. I've been to Betty's Pies many, many, many times. It was a really great place. Love the atmosphere, and of course, I love that pie. And so I just wanted to express my condolences to the family of Betty Lassard for her loss. And thanks, Betty, for all the great pies. One of the things that seems to be happening whenever when we're putting together North Star Oasis is the connections that we seem to be making with the various topics that we discuss every week. And sometimes that means we have a little bit of unfinished business, but for some reason, it all turns out right at the very, very end. Even on our worst days, everything seems to be tied together with a nice little bow. And so we're going to start off this segment here with a verification of something that I had mentioned in the last few weeks about former First Lady, former U.S. Senator, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. I had mentioned every time we've brought up the email situation that I believe that this was an insider job from the Obama administration. I believe that this is an opportunity for the Democrats to get rid of the Clintons, and that's what is driving this. And I found it interesting this past week that a Rasmussen Reports survey came out that said 54% of Democrats want a younger candidate. They want change. And clearly that the Clintons are not offering the change that the Democrat Party wants. Maybe some of the old school, old hardline Democrat financiers may still want the former First Lady, Senator, and Secretary of State, but it appears that the base may very well be wanting somebody different. So now let's take a look at our first clip, which is on Face the Nation, and how they break down the Hillary email flap.
The other huge story of the week, and that is the Hillary Clinton email saga. What's going on here?
Well, I think there's no voter who was on the fence about Hillary Clinton, and there, in fact, may be no voter who's on the fence about Hillary Clinton. But if there were one, I don't think the idea that she had her own server and her private email address as Secretary of State would sway anybody. But it does make us feel like welcome to the new Clinton campaign, just like the old Clinton campaign, where we're going to have these kind of pitch battles, scandals, privacy, control, and that is, I think, not good news for Hillary Clinton, who really needs to be talking about the future. What is her vision? What would she do about income inequality? What would she do about Syria? So I think it's probably kind of disheartening for those of us who are going to spend the next 2 years of our lives covering this campaign.
You know, her husband famously says that's what campaigns are about. The campaigns are about the future and not the past. For a 67-year-old woman who has had the history she's had, and she has had an incredible history in American politics, for her to be demonstrating all of the kinds of traits that people associate with the worst aspects of the Clintons. There are many great aspects about the Clintons that people in America love, but there's other aspects about them people are uneasy with, and in particular, the notion that they play by their own rules. And that came through seeing that spectacle, seeing that press conference. All of that just revives memories that make, for people who have some unease about the Clintons, it revives all those memories, and it certainly makes her look, as Susan said, not like a candidate of the future, not like an avatar of the future, but like some kind of a relic from the 90s.
Right. Well, what was the purpose here, Dana? Was she just trying to make sure there's no paper trail here of her actions?
Well, maybe it was a convenience, as she said 10 or 15 times during that press conference. I don't think the particular email thing is a scandal or particularly damaging. It's been the way she's handled it, and that's what's given all of us who have covered these campaigns before some kind of PTSD, seeing this is going on again. Lanny Davis is out defending her on television, and oh my, you know, that not only is the server private, but we've destroyed some of the emails, and it just feels like the Rose Law Firm all over again. And if you want to get rid of this, yeah, it's unfair, the scrutiny, but if you want to get rid of it, you've got to come clean and move on.
To be clear, I don't think Americans care about how we react to it, right? That it's not nice for us.
But they react,
or remember the Rose Law Firm.
Yes, but it does definitely have that feel.
But to Dana's point, though, it may not be a huge scandal, but there has never been another Secretary of State or a Secretary of head of any other government any other government agency we know of that has done what she did, which was proactively at the very beginning decide, I'm going to set up my own parallel information infrastructure in my house, and then after I leave office, I am going to be the sole judge and jury over what I'm going to release, and then I'm going to destroy everything else. I'm sorry, from the perspective of history, that just looks weird. It does not smell right, and it is unusual, to say the least.
And as President Obama said last night at the Gridiron Dinner, I didn't even know you could have your own server.
He said, I thought I was the candidate of the technological future, and here's Hillary way out ahead of me.
And that was breaking it down. That was people who, you know, actually a lot of those are fellow Democrats just bringing up about how Hillary Clinton shouldn't do that. And I do remember back when I was in the United States Air Force that we had specific rules and regulations that we had to follow on the use of email. And one of the things that you do not do is use your personal email for government business, and you don't use your government business for your government email for personal business. And there were a couple of exceptions to that, and that was usually when our government email wasn't working, and we had, mainly in the case of being a journalist, when we had to email the printer of our weekly paper, our monthly magazine, and the government email server would be down, we would then be able to send a quick note on our personal. But those are exceptions. Those are not the rule. And it just seemed that with this whole thing, even the people who normally would give Hillary Clinton cover are just amazed that she went through the rule, you know, went against the grain, went against the rules to this extent. But now let's take a look at another take on this Hillary Clinton email controversy, and this comes from Ed Klein on the Stuart Varney Show.
Yeah, let's repeat that. Ed Klein, he is the author of Blood Feud, The Clintons versus the Obamas, and he joins us now. You have some news on Hillary's email problem and President Obama. What do you got?
According to my sources, this is only the first of maybe 6 shoes that are going to drop on Hillary in the State Department.
What's that mean?
My sources tell me that Valerie Jarrett has ordered investigations of Hillary Clinton in the State Department, the first of which is now the emails. They're also looking into her expense accounts. They're looking into investigating her use of finances. They're investigating her use of giving contracts to companies that also donated to the Clinton initiative. The bottom line here is that the White House, the Obama White House, does not want to see Hillary Clinton President of the United States.
But they would not be official investigations by the FBI, for example, or by Congress. They would be internal
State Department probes, 6 of them.
All in the State Department?
All in the State Department, and this was the first shoe, the emails.
And you found out about this just in the last couple of days?
Yes.
And the sources close to what's going on?
The sources are in the State Department, and they've seen huge wheeling what do you call it? These places where you put a lot of papers on top, and they're wheeling papers of Hillary's papers all over the place and going through them one pile after another pile after another pile.
Well, that would suggest that the premise of your book, Blood Feud, is entirely correct. There is indeed a feud between President Obama and the Clintons.
I'm not sure I even stated it as strongly as I should have, because the Obamas, in particular Valerie and Michelle, do not want to see the somewhat centrist Clintons in the White House. They want to see some Democratic president who will carry out their more left-wing social agenda. And they don't believe that the Clintons will. They think the Clintons will compromise with the Republicans and balance the budget and welfare reform, all the things that Bill Clinton did when he said the era of big government is over.
Doesn't this, if there are these 6 internal investigations within the State Department prodded by Valerie Jarrett, very close to President Obama, how does that square with President Obama saying over the weekend that he first found out about this in the media? He read it in the newspapers like everybody else.
I don't like to say this about any president, but I think this president lied.
About that specifically?
About that specifically. It was impossible. Hillary was emailing and texting Obama several times during every day that she was Secretary of State about what was going on. How is it possible that he didn't know that these emails were coming from her private?
But if there are all of these investigations into her finances, into the emails, and all the rest of it, as you laid it out, if that's happening, that's coming from the president, that's from the White House, having a go at Hillary Clinton. The Republicans are going to have a go at Hillary Clinton. The left is going to have a go at Hillary Clinton because they don't want a centrist Democrat running for the presidency. That's an overwhelming number of forces going against Hillary. Do you think she survives as a viable candidate? You have to make the judgment for us, Ed.
Well, I've asked people who know Bill about that and what he's now saying to Hillary, and I think, although I don't know this for a fact, this is what they surmise. He's saying, listen, we've faced worse scandals in the past. We've gotten over them. We'll get over this. This will fade. I don't think he's right. I don't think this particular scandal and the others that I believe will come next will fade.
Well, you've broken some news for us, Ed Klein, and we appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed, sir.
Great to be here.
I'm sure you'll be back. Thank you, sir.
And there you have it. We're hearing the people who don't believe that Hillary's going to come back from this. If you take a look, well, actually, before I start that, you know, Hillary Clinton appears now to be in the same boat as the Republican Party and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, according to the Obama administration. That now there's a war going on, and we know that President Obama has been at war with the Republicans ever since, well, he's probably knee-high to a grasshopper. You know, every time you turn around, Obama's blaming the Republicans for something. That's standard. That's his standard operating procedure. We've seen that he's done the same thing with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and now we are starting to see the same thing with his former 2008 nemesis for the nomination, Hillary Clinton. If we can pull up my computer real quick onto the screen. This is from Rasmussen Reports. There we go. Almost. 54% think Democrats should run a fresh face in 2016. This came out Thursday. Most voters think the Democratic Party should look for a presidential newcomer in 2016, and over half of Democrats don't disagree. A new Rasmussen Reports national telephone survey finds that 54% of likely U.S. voters believe Democrats should look for a fresh face to run for president in 2016, rather than promote a candidate who has already run in the past. Only 22% think Democrats should go with a candidate from the past. Just as many, 23%, are not sure. Ask likely Democrat voters that same question, a plurality, 44%, believes the party should promote a candidate who has already run in the past. That's no surprise, given that Hillary Clinton, who unsuccessfully sought the Democrat presidential nomination in 2008, is the overwhelming favorite for 2016. What is surprising, though, is that 57% of Democrats won't commit to someone from the past, with 36% who think the party needs a fresh face and a sizable 21% who are undecided. By comparison, when Mitt Romney was flirting with running again next year, 64% of all voters said Republicans should look for a fresh face to run for president in 2016, and 60% of Republicans agreed. And as I've said before, I think voters in this country from both parties and independents are all saying it's time for a fresh face, no more Clintons, no more Bushes. So it's going to be interesting to see how this story continues to play out, especially if Ed Klein is right in that the State Department has about 4, 5, 6 other things that they're going to be leaking about Hillary Clinton. So then the question becomes, who are the Democrats going to put together as their nominee? There have been people talking about Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren as being a favorite. 27 state representatives and state senators inside the state of New Hampshire have asked Elizabeth Warren to run. And then in the meantime, you also have Martin O'Malley, the former governor of Maryland. He's also talking about stepping in. And as I said last week, that if it looks like Hillary's damaged goods, and if it looks like there's a crack in the armor and that she's not going to be the crown princess, then you're going to start seeing Democrats coming out of the woodwork. And I think if we watch within the next month, we're going to start seeing that more, especially if Ed Klein is right and this isn't going to go away. But speaking of politics and political campaigns, there was another campaign going on, and Congresswoman Betty McCollum was actually pseudo part of that, our 4th District representative. She decided not to go to the speech from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he was here in front of a joint session of Congress. She joined Minnesota Representative Keith Ellison and Senator Al Franken as the 3 of the Minnesota delegations who did not go, and all 3 of them, along with the 51 others who did not, 51 other Democrats who did not show up, they all stated that it's for political reasons, that Netanyahu's here for politics only, and we're not going to be part of Netanyahu's political campaign. And then we find out that as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ended up running for re-election, he actually had to face activists from President Obama's Democratic Party. And there's a nonprofit organization sponsored by a lot of Democrat activist financiers, believed to be at the behest of President Obama, who tried influencing the election on behalf of Netanyahu's opponents. But the thing is, the speech itself, analysts have agreed that it had absolutely no impact on the Israeli elections. But I think we will show you in a few minutes about what has had an impact on Israeli elections. So the first thing we're going to show is what we were trying to show at the end of last week, and we're going to go to Henry Kissinger, and we're going to replay a little bit of debate about the 2008 presidential debate over opening discussions with Iran without preconditions. If you recall, John McCain, the GOP nominee, Barack Obama, the Democrat nominee, they were having this big discussion about whether to have discussions with Iran and whether or not preconditions need to be part of it, and they even brought Henry Kissinger into this. So we're going to show you a clip that we had begun playing last week about preconditions, and then we're going to go from there.
Mentioned Henry Kissinger, who's one of his advisors, who along with 5 recent secretaries of state just said that we should meet with Iran, guess what, without precondition. This is one of your own advisors.
Dr. Kissinger did not say that he would approve of face-to-face meetings between the President of the United States and the President Ahmadinejad. He did not say that.
The candidates sparring last night over whether a United States president should sit down without preconditions with Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. It is something that Barack Obama wants to do, and something McCain says is not only naive, it's downright dangerous. Each man claiming that Kissinger supports his position. So what's the truth? Well, joining me now on the phone is former Secretary of State to Presidents Nixon and Ford, Dr. Henry Kissinger. Mr. Secretary, good evening to you.
Nice to talk to you.
Nice to have you here. All right, so what is the truth? Do you support the notion of an American president sitting down with Ahmadinejad without preconditions?
No, I don't. I have argued that at some point negotiations with Iran are important, but it is my view that they should be on the working level and that the president should not be involved until we know that we are close to an agreement or that we know what the nature of the agreement is.
So in other words, you favor negotiations at the lower level, perhaps all the way up to the Secretary of State, but you do not believe an American president should sit down without preconditions, as Barack Obama says he would like to do.
That is correct.
What is the danger in having a president do that?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that if Iran acquires nuclear weapons, that will be a dramatic change in the situation in the most explosive region of the world today, in the Middle East. It will give Iran a capability to protect jihadism with the threat of nuclear weapons, and it will demonstrate that the opinion of the United Nations Security Council, which asked Iran to desist from building nuclear weapons, has been totally ignored, and therefore it will start an arms race for nuclear weapons in that region. A number of countries have declared that nuclear weapons in Iran are unacceptable. So what we need is a definition of what we mean by unacceptable and what we're going to do if diplomacy does not succeed. It's in this context that I believe negotiations should be conducted to demonstrate either that we can achieve what we define as unacceptable or that other measures have to be taken. But in order to do this, it has to be at a level in which one can test the various issues that are raised by such an effort. And if you start with the president, then that means that presidents in general should not be the first negotiators, because if a negotiation at that level fails, you really have no other recourse. And it would be in the conditions of a country that has declared America as the principal enemy. To start at that level would be to legitimize their conduct over a whole period of time.
And let me ask you, Mr. Secretary, one of the things John McCain says is that it would legitimize Ahmadinejad in the eyes of the world. In other words, you give this man who says Israel should be wiped off the face of the map legitimacy by even having that sort of photo op with him. What are your thoughts on it?
I think McCain is right, and I think it is unwise to sit down with Ahmadinejad at this point. If Iran really wants to negotiate with us, they will find a negotiator who has the prospect of achieving something that needs to be done. And secondly, if progress is to be made, there have to be a lot of exchanges at other levels. Before Mao and Nixon sat down, there were 2 years of exchanges at lower levels.
Understood. And the candidates are at issue on that and many other items. Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on, setting the record straight. We appreciate it.
Pleasure to talk to you.
All the best.
And that was the whole thing about the importance of preconditions in discussions with Iran. And the biggest thing that you've heard the former Secretary of State say was, you know, the Iranians having nuclear weapons will have a dramatic change in the situation in that vulnerable part of the world, and that it should be unacceptable for Iran to have nuclear weapons, and that it will also legitimize Iran and Ahmadinejad. Now, Ahmadinejad is no longer the president of Iran. That is Hassan Rouhani. I do not know anything about Hassan Rouhani, but I'm sure I'll be learning more about him in the next couple of weeks. So that was, what happened 6 years ago. But now, here we have Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu comes to the United States Congress, and we're going to show clip 3 right now. This is just a clip of him really discussing the importance of what's going on with Iran in world affairs, along with the reason why he's here, or he came here March 3rd.
My friends, I've come here today because as Prime Minister of Israel, I feel a profound obligation to speak to you about an issue that could well threaten the survival of my country and the future of my people: Iran's quest for nuclear weapons. We're an ancient people. In our nearly 4,000 years of history, many have tried repeatedly to destroy the Jewish people. Tomorrow night, on the Jewish holiday of Purim, we'll read the book of Esther. We'll read of a powerful Persian viceroy named Aman, who plotted to destroy the Jewish people some 2,500 years ago. But a courageous Jewish woman, Queen Esther, exposed the plot and gained for the Jewish people the right to defend themselves against their enemies. The plot was foiled. Our people were saved. Today, the Jewish people face another attempt by yet another Persian potentate to destroy us. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, spews the oldest hatred of anti-Semitism with the newest technology. He tweets that Israel must be annihilated. He tweets. In Iran, there isn't exactly free internet. But he tweets in English that Israel must be destroyed. For those who believe that Iran threatens a Jewish state, but not the Jewish people, listen to Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, Iran's chief terrorist proxy. He said, "If all the Jews gather in Israel, it will save us the trouble of chasing them down around the world." But Iran's regime is not merely a Jewish problem, any more than the Nazi regime was merely a Jewish problem. The 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis were but a fraction of the 60 million people killed in World War II. So too, Iran's regime poses a grave threat not only to Israel, but also to the peace of the entire world. To understand just how dangerous Iran would be with nuclear weapons, we must fully understand the nature of the regime. The people of Iran are very talented people. They're heirs to one of the world's great civilizations. But in 1979, they were hijacked by religious zealots who imposed on them immediately a dark and brutal dictatorship. That year, the zealots drafted a constitution, a new one for Iran. It directed the Revolutionary Guards not only to protect Iran's borders, but also to fulfill the ideological mission of jihad. The regime's founder, Ayatollah Khomeini, exhorted his followers to export the revolution throughout the world. I'm standing here in Washington, D.C., and the difference is so stark. America's founding document promises life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Iran's founding document pledges death, tyranny, and the pursuit of jihad. And as states are collapsing across the Middle East, Iran is charging into the void to do just that. Iran's goons in Gaza, its lackeys in Lebanon, its Revolutionary Guards on the Golan Heights are clutching Israel with 3 tentacles of terror. Backed by Iran, Assad is slaughtering Syrians. Backed by Iran, Shiite militias are rampaging through Iraq. Backed by Iran, Houthis are seizing control of Yemen, threatening the strategic straits at the mouth of the Red Sea. Along with the Straits of Hormuz, that would give Iran a second choke point on the world's oil supply. Just last week, near Hormuz, Iran carried out a military exercise blowing up a mock US aircraft carrier. That's just last week, while they're having nuclear talks with the United States. But unfortunately, for the last 36 years, Iran's attacks against the United States have been anything but mock, and the targets have been all too real. Iran took dozens of Americans hostage in Tehran, murdered hundreds of American soldiers, Marines in Beirut, and was responsible for killing and maiming thousands of American servicemen and women in Iraq and Afghanistan. Beyond the Middle East, Iran attacks America and its allies through its global terror network. It blew up the Jewish Community Center and the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires. It helped al-Qaeda bomb US embassies in Africa. It even attempted to assassinate the Saudi ambassador right here in Washington, D.C. In the Middle East, Iran now dominates 4 Arab capitals: Baghdad, Damascus, Beirut, and Sana'a. And if Iran's aggression is left unchecked, more will surely follow. So at a time when many hope that Iran will join the community of nations, Iran is busy gobbling up the nations. We must all stand together to stop Iran's march of conquest, subjugation, and terror.
And if you recall, in 1930s, when we had Neville Chamberlain come back from meeting with Adolf Hitler, and he held up a statement and said, "We have peace in our times, peace is at hand." And what happened? Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime out of Germany, they were gobbling up all of the countries around them, and they were building what they had called the Third Reich. And we later, a few years later, had World War II. What are we seeing in Iran? We're seeing a parallel to that. No, I'm not equating Barack Obama and Neville, well, kind of equating Barack Obama and Neville Chamberlain a little bit there with the peace in our time. I am not saying necessarily that Iran equals Hitler, but Rouhani is Hitler. I'm not saying that because I do think that things are falling into a pattern here that we have seen before, and we need to be very vigilant and watch what's going on, because this is going to come back and impact us here in the St. Paul area. When I was just while watching that clip, I was also perusing through Rouhani's Facebook page, and it mentioned some really interesting thing about the Iran-Iraq War from the 1980s, when he was what he was doing during that period. From 1982 to 1988. During the Iran-Iraq War, Rouhani was a member of the Supreme Defense Council. From 1982 to 88, he was a member of the High Council for Supporting War and headed its executive committee from 86 to 88. He was deputy commander of the war, 83 to 85. He was commander of the Qatam Nbia Operations Center, 85 to 88. He was commander of the Iran Air Defense Force from 86 to 91. He was appointed to deputy to second command of Iran's Joint Chiefs of Staff in 88 and 89. And when Robert McFarlane, it's a name we haven't heard in a long, long time, the National Security Advisor for President Ronald Reagan, came to Tehran in 1986, May of 86, Rouhani was one of the 3 people who had talked to McFarlane about buying weapons. Eventually, this weapon sale was known as the Iran-Contra affair. And so one of the key players from the Iran-Contra affair on the Iranian side is now the president of Iran. what was he doing in May of '86? This is when he was on the executive committee. He was at the Qatam Operations Center, and he rose his way up from there. Now he is the president of Iran. The question is, if he's now the president of Iran and he's got military experience, is he a good guy or is he a bad guy? We don't know. I mean, McFarland was meeting with the guy, so you kind of want to think that maybe that there's something good about him. But on the other hand, today's day and age, we don't even know, because if you look back at the Iran-Iraq War, we had sided with Saddam Hussein. He was a good guy because he was an Iranian. And this, again, comes back to last week. The enemy of my enemy is not your friend. And so we play Saddam Hussein by 1990, then we're against Saddam Hussein, and so things in the Middle East are still unraveling. We have a tendency of believing the Iranians when they say that they are about peace. Again, that's in the air quotes, say, but yet we don't believe them when they write about the destruction of Little Satan and the Big Satan, Little Satan being Israel, Big Satan being the United States. We don't believe them when they tweet out that they want the destruction and the annihilation of the Jewish people. We don't believe them when they tweet out that they have to go around the world and hunt them down. There are a lot of Jewish people living here in the St. Paul area, so we're going to have Iranians coming over here to annihilate the Israelis who live here in our own community. Why don't we believe them if we believe that they're all about peace? So let's hear what U.S. Senator Marco Rubio has to say about Netanyahu's speech.
And what are the underpinnings of Israeli security? There are two things. The first, the ability of Israel to defend itself. And the second, the reality that if Israel ever has to defend itself, the United States will be there to support them. There is little doubt about the first pillar of its security. As the Prime Minister reminded us, unlike many other countries, Israel is not asking us to send American soldiers or aircraft to support them. They are willing to defend themselves. But the second pillar, about strong and unquestionable American support, is increasingly being questioned around the world. And there's good reason why. Let's begin by the aftermath of this recent election. As far as I know, maybe this has changed in the last few hours, after this election, the President has yet to call the Prime Minister. That is unlike, of course, the fact that in March of 2012, he was among the first to call and congratulate Putin in Moscow. Or that in June of 2012, he was among the first to call Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood when they won the Egyptian presidency. Or that in November of 2012, they called to congratulate the top Chinese communists on their new position, which, by the way, is not elected in the way you and I would consider there to be an election. Or the fact that in 2013, it was a historic phone call they brag about, how they called the Iranian president and congratulated him on his election. And of course, in August of 2014, he called to congratulate Turkey's President Erdogan, and on and on. Time and again, this president has made a habit of quickly calling these leaders when they win. But as of 4:40 Eastern Time, as far as I know, that call has yet not been made. And thinking about all the things that have been going on with Israel, you would think they would be quick to make that call. It hasn't happened. Maybe it has already, but it certainly didn't happen far enough. But where does this come from? Is this new? Is this something that's just happened recently? It isn't. In fact, you can start to see the trends here pretty early. In October of 2008, then Senator Obama told an audience in Cleveland, quote, "There is a strain within the pro-Israel community that says that unless you adopt an unwavering pro-Likud approach," which is one of the political parties in Israel, "unless you adopt an unwavering pro-Likud approach to Israel, then you are anti-Israeli," which is a silly comment to make since at that time that party had been out of power. In January of 2009, the president, upon taking office, makes a quick phone call to the Palestinian Authority president, Mahmoud Abbas, before he even phoned the Israeli prime minister. "This is my first phone call to a foreign leader, and I am making it only hours after I took office," Abbas's spokesman was quoted Obama saying. In June of 2009,
what was Senator Marco Rubio referring to? He was actually referring to the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu had won his re-election. He won it. The very thing that Betty McCollum, Keith Ellison, and Al Franken were complaining about was Netanyahu coming over here to look good for his re-election campaign, which, as I mentioned, the speech had absolutely no implications on whether or not Netanyahu won or lost in his home country. Had no bearing on that. But then what happens? He wins re-election anyway. And this was bound to happen. As a matter of fact, if anything that had a bearing on the Israeli elections, there was really two things. Because one, he won in a landslide. So the first thing is, I really do think that Obama's opposition to Netanyahu actually made Netanyahu more powerful. So I guess I say the speech itself didn't have the repercussions, ramifications in the Israeli elections. I think the opposition from Barack Obama had more to do with that in the news cycles than you actually had from the speech. And then, of course, he's standing up to a sitting United States president. So that's got a lot to do with that. One thing is, we always like to look at the underdog here in the United States. And we always think that people need to stand up and look at what happens within the country of Israel when you have their prime minister standing up to a sitting United States president who is opposing him. That, I think, had more to do with the re-election than the speech itself did. But now, let me tell you that there was one secret weapon, one card, one ace in the hole that Benjamin Netanyahu had coming for him that I do not think that Barack Obama or Netanyahu's opponent saw coming. And believe it or not, that's Chuck Norris. Because when Chuck Norris gets involved with things, watch out. So let's go to the tape.
I'm Chuck Norris, and I would like to say hello to all my friends in Israel. I watched Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech before Congress and saw a man who loves his country with all his heart and soul. I also saw a strong leader, which is absolutely crucial for the safety of the Israeli people. I have done 3 movies in Israel, Gulf Force being my favorite, and I formed many friendships while there. You have an incredible country, and we want to keep it that way. That's why it's so important to keep a leader who has the courage and vision to stand up against the evil forces that are threatening not only Israel, but the United States. So I ask you to vote for Prime Minister Netanyahu on Election Day. Thank you for listening to me.
Now that was an incredible roundhouse kick, right? Not a bad idea. Our producer says, let's start a draft Chuck committee. What do you think? Do you think that maybe Chuck Norris ought to just get it over with and run for president? I think he's going to make some waves. Hey, Chuck Norris for president. What do you think? I mean, if he can get the Prime Minister of Israel reelected, then maybe he can get himself elected as well. Now, all joking aside, let's take a look at the response when it appeared. Now, before we look at the response, I want to remind you that that's all we heard in the news cycle leading up to that election in Israel. Here in America, all we're hearing is how Netanyahu is behind in the polls. It is a close race. He's probably not going to get reelected. It's not going to happen, and we heard that so many times. We heard it was going to be a very, very slim victory, that it's really, really close. Sounds a lot like U.S. election polling that we hear. We hear every election cycle that the polls are really, really tight. It's really, really, really close. But then election day comes, it's not even close, one way or the other. But the fact is, we're seeing the same games here in the United States media, and the Associated Press, the Washington Times, the Washington Post, the New York Times. All of these newspapers are coming out saying that this election is going to be close. Netanyahu is not going to win, but he won. But now let's take a look at the media reaction to Prime Minister Netanyahu's reelection. from Bloomberg.
In the final 24 hours before the vote, Netanyahu shocked many, reversing his earlier position and coming out formally against Palestinian statehood. Some here said it came across as desperate. Is there a sense there that it won him the election?
Olivia, certainly Netanyahu managed to shore up his right-wing base in the last 24 hours of this election. That declaration saying that on his watch there would be no Palestinian state, a statement of the obvious, some would say, but certainly not something that would have gone down well with the Palestinians, the White House, or Israel's European allies. That certainly was not the most shocking thing he said. The most shocking thing was a video he posted on his Facebook page yesterday urging people to come out and vote because there was a large Arab turnout at the polls yesterday, something that hasn't traditionally happened, and he was worried that the Arab parties, the United Arab List, might steal some votes away from him, or he would have a tougher time in Parliament. But of course some people might see it as desperation. Others in the future, looking back, may see this simply as a series of tactical masterstrokes, because ultimately it worked. He pinched some votes from further to the right and is now the biggest party in Parliament, likely to be Prime Minister again.
Elliot, do we have any early sense of what his coalition is going to look like and what that'll mean for policy?
He says he's already spoken with the leaders of the other right-wing parties with a view to forming some kind of coalition. Certainly it will remain as it was regarding Iran. As for the Palestinians, I think Netanyahu has already pretty much said there's no chance of peace talks, or there's no point in peace talks resuming, because there's not going to be a Palestinian state on his watch. Not that it would be able to be wrapped up, even with the best of will in the world, within a 4-year prime ministerial term, but still, the mood music is not right for that to resume, and he's also going to focus on socio-economic matters as well.
Well, Netanyahu came out just before, as the Bloomberg piece had mentioned, said that there will not be a Palestinian state in his tenure. Well, the thing, and yet he'd previously said that there will be a two-state solution. And the thing is, considering that if he would have lost, he would have been right. If he would have lost, there would not have been a two-state solution in his term, because there's not a two-state solution going on now. And then, of course, in the next 4 years, if it's probably doubtful at this point that he'll run for a 5th term. But the thing is, in the next 4 years, is this actually going to happen? Probably not. So Netanyahu is not lying. He did not change his position. He did not change his mind, even though the Western press wants to make it sound that way. Even though President Barack Obama wants to make it sound that way. The fact is, the same position that he's had, it never changed. Now, wording may have changed just a slight little bit, but the meaning of the word still hasn't. But the biggest thing here, the biggest takeaway is the fact that President Obama failed in his initiative to defeat Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. That's another failure of the Obama administration. And really, the first failure, what was that first failure of the Obama administration? It was the Olympic Games, not landing the Olympic Games for 2016 in Chicago. This is when President Obama went to the head of the Olympic Committee. He made his appeal, a fresh president who just received the Nobel Peace Prize, and they awarded it to Brazil. That was the first of the many failures for the Nobel Peace Prize recipient. Thank heavens he failed in this. Thank heavens that Benjamin Netanyahu got reelected, because the consequences of having his opposition in would have been severe, not just for Israel, but also for the United States. So Netanyahu will be working for the next 4 years of trying to make sure that Iran does not get its way and get nuclear weapons. That's what the last month has been all about. So now, where do we go from here? We already got the talks going on between the United States, the United Nations, and Iran. They've opened the talks. As a matter of fact, we're going to show the first clip under the Iraq segment on the talks, and just to show from the Iranian perspective, just a little glimpse. We'll be discussing more and more about this in the upcoming programs. But let's just take a look from an Iranian perspective on what they say about talks.
Negotiators from Iran and the P5+1 countries have begun talks about a UN resolution to lift the sanctions against the Islamic Republic. Negotiations are taking place at a senior foreign ministry level. Western officials in the talks say they are also discussing elements of a draft resolution for the Security Council to begin easing the UN sanctions, which have been in place since 2006. Well, the talks are held ahead of scheduled negotiations next week in Switzerland. The negotiating teams are trying to reach a final agreement by the end of June. A Security Council resolution on a nuclear deal with Iran could be legally binding for all governments.
And that was just a little taste, but I want to make one other observation here, if I got to find it here. Because this is actually possibly the part of prophecy, believe it or not. We just had the blood moons, the fourth blood moon, and I'm just trying to find out the 4 blood moons. A blood moon is a total lunar eclipse. They're rare. About 1 in 3 lunar eclipses are total. About 4 to 5 total eclipses can be seen at any place on Earth in a decade. Lunar eclipses usually do not occur in any specific order. However, every once in a while, 4 total lunar eclipses happen in a row. This is called a lunar tetrad. The total lunar eclipses happen 6 months apart. There are at least 6 full moons between 2 lunar eclipses in tetrad. Now what I'm trying to do, and they're also called the blood moon, and I'm trying to find when the next one, the 4th and final one, is supposed to occur, I believe, next month. Yes, actually the last 2. The first total eclipse in this lunar tetrad was on April 15th, 2014. The second was October 8th of 2014. The next one will be April 4th, 2015. And then September 28th, 2015. Now there is some people who do believe that a tetrad has a special significance because the eclipses coincide with important Jewish festivals. The 2 lunar eclipses in 2014-2015 occur at the same time as Passover, while the October and September eclipses occur during the Feast of the Tabernacle. This is connected to biblical prophecy of the end of times. The fact is that 8 of the tetrads since the 1st century have coincided with Jewish holidays without the world going under, so there's no reason to believe that the 2014-2015 tetrad will end the world at this time either. However, when we're discussing Israel and a nuclear Iran, and right in the middle of this tetrad, the second part of the tetrad happens to be the agreement or disagreement, agreement on lifting the Iranian sanctions and allowing them to make nuclear weapons. Maybe there is something to this. This is actually, this whole blood moon tetrad and prophecy is actually something I've just recently heard about. I don't know much about it. I'm not going to proclaim myself to be an expert. I do not know enough. I haven't looked at the historical record to see what important things have happened in Israel's history during the blood moon tetrad. But we're in the middle of one of them right now. And what's that next card that's going to happen? And in the next couple of weeks, I'm sure I'll learn a lot more material, and I know that some of our viewers will also be enlightening me. So that's one thing, to be looking at. Another thing I wanted to bring up before we leave for the day is that this is the week here in the St. Paul area for the Osman Temple Shrine Circus. And a few weeks ago, we had discussed how the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus has decided not to run with elephants in their circus at the end of the 2018 season, which ends in, I believe, May of 2018, November of 2018. But that also means that right here in our area, we get the annual Shrine Circus, and that's coming up on March 26th through 29th at the Minnesota State Fair Coliseum. And if we can put my computer screen up on the monitor. our young intern is still learning the ropes here. There we go. 2015 performance schedule. Thursday, March 26th at 10:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. We've got Friday, so this coming Friday, March 27th. We've got 10:30 a.m., 2:30 p.m., 7:30 p.m. Saturday, next Saturday, 10 a.m., 2:30 p.m. Don't go to the 2:30 p.m. show. Just make sure that you keep tuning into us next week. But then, believe it or not, right after that, we can come over to the 7:30 show. So after watching North Star Oasis next week, then make sure you go on over and see the Shrine Circus if you don't see it before. I think for this viewing audience, Saturday morning at 10 a.m. would probably be the optimal time. But then we also have Sunday, March 29th, 1 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. So if you still want to see circus elephants, you can. They're not completely gone yet from all the circuses. Don't give in to the animal rights activists. We've shown you the video of what happens to elephants in Africa and the wholesale wanton destruction at the hands of poachers, at the hands of those who want to kill elephants for their ivory tusks. We can at least still get up close and personal with elephants. Now, I know the PETA people will come out and say, well, that's exploitation. But then again, killing elephants for their ivory tusks is also exploitation. So I would rather use my money to at least have a little bit of enjoyment with a living elephant than to buy a piece of elephant tusk knowing full well that the thing had been killed just because he has that elephant tusk. Putting all the elephants back into the wild is a bad idea. There are a lot of other things that we can do. But I also want to end on this note that the Shriners do a fabulous job. And I'm going to say this because I had a situation with my own family that my niece's 4-year-old daughter had heart surgery recently, just a couple of weeks ago. 4-year-old daughter, open heart surgery. It was the Shriners. She came down here to the Minneapolis Shriners Hospital at the U of M campus, and she had open heart surgery. This is her second one. She's 4 years old. But the Shriners took care of the matter. She's a healthy 4-year-old, running around, energetic, 2 weeks after the surgery. But they do a fabulous job working with children. And so I'm promoting the Shrine Circus. You go to Osman, O-S-M-A-N, circus.com. Go to osmancircus.com. Go to the circus, but then don't be afraid to do a little bit extra and help the Shriners out with their medical mission. They do a fabulous job at the University of Minnesota Shriners Hospital. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so moved for both the circus but also their mission. Because these are the ones who are doing the things in the low-income communities. These are the people who are making differences, and positive differences in people's lives. A whole lot more than animal rights activists are doing. So go to osmancircus.com. Show up Thursday, Friday, Saturday, not the 2:30 show, or Sunday. Support the Shriners, support the Shrine Circus. And then, with that, just another reminder that you have 278 shopping days left until Christmas. So by going to the Shrine Circus, perhaps you can find some memorabilia, some artifact that you'll be able to give to somebody for Christmas next year, somebody who loves the circus. So, Shrine Circus, osmancircus.com. And then don't forget North Star Oasis. We are on Twitter. We are on Facebook, and we are on YouTube. Everything is just North Star Oasis. And I'm Jeff Williams, your host, and on behalf of our crew, our stellar crew, these guys do a fabulous job week after week. I want to say thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.